Amen. Amen. You may be seated. Thank you for that. We are in a series called Rest for the Weary, a collection of teachings that started a couple of weeks ago. If you were here, talking through just my journey of learning to rest, learning to live within my limits, learning to honor the boundaries that God has given me, physical, emotional, and so based on that, I didn't want to just share my update of health, but God impressed upon me to think through what actually can, how we can structure our lives around rest. And thankfully, the Bible has a lot to say about that. And so last week, we talked about the Sabbath. If you were familiar with the Sabbath, it is a special day. Sabbath was a special day of rest where God's people would cease toiling and enjoy the completion of their work, as well as delight in the goodness of God's work. A special day of rest that God built in. Last week we talked about God did this. He rested from work in the story of creation right from the beginning, and then he put it in the law so that we would obey it. It was that important that one of the 10 commandments was a command to rest and stop working. That just blows my mind. I shared with the pre-huddle team this morning as we prayed that as I rediscover, I've read like 3 or 4 books on Sabbath. I've studied so many scriptures on Sabbath these last few weeks and trying to understand what's underneath it. Because I can't wrap my head around being a California born and raised, young, millennial. What generation am I? X, Z, Y? I don't know. Whatever generation, millennial. That for me, it's hard to think that rest is a priority because I think I'm invincible, I'm young, I got energy, I could do it, and we're in a hustle state of, West Coast, Bay Area, and so we grind and work, and that God would implant this command of rest to make it so central in the story of Israel and in his way of shaping God's people, his people. I'm just trying to understand, why is this so important? It wasn't just a side comment. It was one of the main things that Israel was supposed to do. Brought up so many times in the scriptures. Sabbath is mentioned over 60 times in the Bible in various ways, and not just thrown away kind of comments, but central to how they were to act. So I'm trying to rediscover, what does that look like for me and my family and our staff. We've been practicing Sabbath every week for the last year plus, trying to think through what it looks like. And I just want to say this. I want to have some setup, some kind of prefaces to frame why we're talking about this again. Because I know if I talk about what Sabbath is and don't convince you on why you need to honor it, then it's easy for you to throw away the practice because the weight isn't there. And I got to put this out there just so there's no confusion. I said this last week, but I want to make it very clear because some people have asked me, are we supposed to do this? Are we supposed to keep the Sabbath? We're not supposed to keep it anymore. Jesus is our true Sabbath. And I would say this, are we obligated to keep the Sabbath? You answer the question. Are you just reading that or you really mean that? Yes, we're not obligated to keep the Sabbath in the same way that Israel was obligated to keep the Sabbath. Exodus 31 says, whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. All y'all be dead. All y'all will be dead, I'll be dead, we all will be dead. Like, we just would not, West Coast, millennial, whatever you want to call yourself, we would not last. We'd be on our devices hiding it from Moses and God would strike us down. Like, it's not going to work. You're on Slack, on email. So that is not what we're under right now. But is it wise, relevant for us, and helpful? Yes. And so can you argue, is this how we're supposed to live because of Jesus comes? Sure, Jesus is our true rest. But I think it is really wise. And if you don't want to take a day off and honor the Sabbath, or you can call whatever you want, then you can go ahead to your own demise. You can suffer the weight of having to work 7 days a week, but that is not how you were created to live and work. And so I think it is helpful for us to honor this. And let me connect it again to Jesus. We're talking about the practice of Sabbathing, or practicing Sabbath, not because Christ does not offer us true rest. Let me make that very clear. I'm not introducing Sabbath as a practice for our church because Jesus doesn't give us true rest. I'm not telling you take a day off and honor Sabbath because the gospel isn't the cure for our weariness. The gospel is the cure for our weariness. But we're practicing Sabbath because we often, you and I, with our disordered and restless lifestyles, work ourselves out of being able to receive and enjoy that rest. Yes, Jesus is the final fulfillment of the Sabbath. He is our place of rest. And yet, if we live frantic and restless lives, never having boundaries, never living within our limits, the rest Jesus offers will be really hard to enjoy and receive and make it your own, because you will be fighting against it with how you live. And so I think the Sabbath is a means to a greater end of being able to enjoy Jesus and to love Jesus and become a person of love. Is Sabbath the goal? No. It is a gift to be able to love Jesus more. And it is very different than a day off that we're going to find out later on. Last thing I want to say to kind of frame it. Jesus' promise of rest is only true. Remember, we start off this series talking about, it's my favorite passage. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." And he says, "Take my yoke upon me and learn from me." Well, the people that experience the rest that Jesus offers are the people that trade in the heavy yoke of this world with Jesus' easy and light yoke, living the way he lived by his side at his pace. So if you're standing here carrying and continually self-inflicting yourself, putting on the heavy yoke of expectation and burden that this world or your boss or your mom or dad or whatever puts on you, and you don't trade it in for the easy and light yoke of Jesus, then even though you want that rest, you won't be able to experience it. Does that make sense? You'll be fighting against the rest that Jesus is offering. It's not that something is wrong with Jesus. He doesn't want to give you rest, or he doesn't work. He's not true. No. All those things are true. But if we're supposed to trade yokes. Jesus has a yoke. We're yoking up with Jesus so that we go at his pace, at his side, and living the way he lived. Jesus honored the Sabbath, but more than that, I would say Jesus would never live the way we live in this 21st century. He would not fit in. He would stand out. This is a heavy yoke we have to carry, constantly being inundated with news and media and work and emails and pressure and all this stuff. That is not the way. Jesus did not live that way. So we need to take off our heavy yoke and put on the easy yoke of Jesus. And I want to do that because I want to experience the rest that Jesus has. Because if I live the way Jesus lives, I will experience his life. And that's the goal of discipleship, is apprenticing yourself to Jesus, saying, I'm going to follow you. And we want to do that. So the question I want to ask today, if you're taking notes, and I encourage you that you do engage in taking notes, is how do we properly practice the Sabbath? We talked about making it practical, and it's funny, but not funny. This week, I got put into jury duty, out of my control. And so I spent a couple of days, all day in jury duty. And so, of course, that leaves me with little time to do the things that I need to do. And because of all the things that happened this week and the fact that I spent 30, I don't know how many hours at jury duty, I didn't get to actually, even though I studied and worked a lot on thinking through some thoughts, I didn't get to this message until last night, like actually being able to write it, which is not ideal, and I don't usually do that. And as I was thinking through this and thinking through these thoughts, I wanted to make it really practical as we talk about this, but this stuff kept coming up that I'm going to talk about today that needs to be properly put in context. Because there is a way to approach the Sabbath that will turn this gift of rest from God into just another heavy burden to carry. There's a way where you can try to take a day off, try to approach the Sabbath, and all it becomes is just another heavy burden for you. And if you don't know your history through the Bible, that's what happens with the Pharisees. They took the Sabbath and they started adding hundreds of regulations around how to practice it and how not to practice it. And guess what? The idea of Sabbath, when Jesus enters into history at that time with the Jews, was not a gift, it was a burden. They couldn't take so many steps. They had to not, one of the laws was, not from the Bible, but the Jews, you couldn't drag a stick on the ground just in case you passed a farm and you accidentally tilled that land. That was the rules they created. You can't walk so many steps, so they would bring two different pairs of shoes, so they'd take off their shoes and put on other shoes. These loopholes to how to figure out how to honor the Sabbath, and all it became was a burden. So the last thing I want to do is to have us enter into the Sabbath with all these false rules and loopholes, so we feel like it's actually another burden on our life and not a blessing. Does that make sense? We don't want this gift of rest to turn into a burden and then we become bitter. Because I know how you and I spend our days off can either give us rest or make you more weary. Yes or yes? You might have 2 days off every week. But some of those times, the way we spend it leaves us more weary on Monday morning than rested. And I don't want that to be the case for this, because I want to experience the rest that God has and to be able to enjoy the rest that he wants to give us. So if you have a Bible, let's turn to Genesis 2. I'm going to read this once again, and I want to kind of get underneath one of the first commands of Sabbath that I think we need to practice, because there are some deep underlying sin issues that is connected to this. Sabbath reveals a lot in us that Jesus wants to refine us from. So Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished. So at this point, God had created for 6 days. And the earth was finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. If you notice, there's repetition in that passage. Repetition means that there's significance to what is being repeated. So the author of Genesis is trying to help you understand that God did work and he rested from his work. And it didn't just say that once, it said it multiple times. He finished his work, number one. He rested from his work, number two. And he rested from his work. 3 times in those 3 verses is mentioning the same idea. God stopped working. Now, I said this last week. I'm going to build on this idea and go a little bit deeper. That word rest is actually the word Sabbath, which is where we get Sabbath. And it means to cease to work. But what it also means is to be inactive, to stop. It literally means to stop, to be at a standstill, or to have an end. Like you did something and now that it's completed and there's a boundary line, there's an end to whatever you were doing. So if you put that back into the context, God created for 6 days, then he had an end to his creative work and looked at it as completed, and he stepped away from it. And so it was a boundary line that didn't cross. The work didn't bleed into the seventh day. And so beautiful, this is for free, not really the main point. But can you think and imagine the wonder of Adam and Eve being created on the 6th day? The first day they actually experienced life was the day of rest. Their first day, full day with God, was a day of not working, but rest. It was the 7th day. God created Adam and Eve on the 6th. So their first day of life was rest, which makes me think this is so important and such a picture of the gospel that we are not commanded to work in order to get rest. The gospel of God says God gives us rest from our work, and we work from our rest. That's so helpful to realize. That's one of the first pictures that you can say of the gospel in Genesis, is that God rests and then creates Adam and Eve to rest on the first day. So the first picture Adam and Eve have of God is not this taskmaster saying, do these things, but it is a picture of God saying, be with me, enjoy what I've created. It's amazing. Some of you don't have that picture of God. You view God as a taskmaster. You view God as wanting you to make sure all the rules are figured out and the boxes are checked. And so religious interactions, Christianity, church, everything becomes a little bit of a burden to you because you always feel like you're not checking off the right boxes. And that's not a picture or accurate picture of the God that we serve. From the first image of God, we get a God who honors work. Work is good, but also has the rhythm of rest. Now, the question should be asked, how difficult can this be to cease work? I mean, we're going to teach a whole sermon on this, Chris. Just don't go into the office. Simple, right? Just don't check your emails. Just don't schedule a meeting. And I think if I were to ask you and you were to raise your hand and we talk about this, how many folks don't go to the office, don't check your emails, don't schedule a meeting? I would think many of us do those things on our Saturday, Sunday, whatever you want to call it, your days off. You're not doing a whole bunch of actual work or the job that you get paid for. And many of us, we're not doing our jobs on the weekends, and that's great. And yet, somehow, we still find ourselves depleted, weary, restless, and not replenished going into Monday. And so I want to answer the question, and I think it begs to be answered. What does it really mean to stop working? Because if work is just confined to a 9-to-5 job, and we don't go into our work on Saturday and Sunday, but we feel exhausted, then we have to figure out, what is God meaning? Is that Is that all he means? And we have to just figure it out and maybe it's not working? You can call it whatever you want. A Sabbath, a day off. I don't care what you call it. A weekend. It's very clear that we were created not to work 7 days a week. And you need time off. But just normal time off is not always going to do the trick of giving you rest. You know that because you've been on vacations and you've been exhausted. You've had days off and you've been exhausted. And so we have to figure out what is it that we're doing on our days off that is actually ruining our rest, and what do we need to do to rearrange that? That's why the wisdom of the Sabbath is so helpful for us. So let's go back to Genesis 2 really quick. This is going to hopefully help us answer the question. I want you to see this again. So God blessed the seventh day, and he made it. Let's read this, actually, the whole verse together on 3. 1, 2, 3. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. He made it holy. Now, we know from last week that the word holy isn't talking about like moral purity here. It's talking about being different, set apart. There were 6 days, and the seventh was supposed to be not like the other 6 days. So what he's saying is, whatever you do on the other 6 days should not be brought into the seventh. Very clear? However you live on the 6 days should not be how you live on the seventh. And I would even say the posture that you take on the 6 days should not be the posture that you have on the seventh. It is holy. It is set apart. It is different. I think one of the reasons why we feel exhausted even though we have days off is we have the same mentality on the 6 days as the seventh. We're just reshuffling the work we do. We're reshuffling it. Now, what do we do on those other 6 days that are good things? Work is good. Well, we are doing things like accomplishing tasks. Who feels good when they can check off a to-do list? Yep. It's with Serena and AJ, and Serena says, I have a long honey-do list to AJ. I said, I have a long honey don't list, and that didn't go so well. So don't say that back. Just joking. You need that. But checking off boxes are great, and we're accomplishing things. And I feel great when I accomplish things that I set out to do, and we're achieving things, and we're laboring and toiling. Remember, God said to cultivate the land and work it before the curse. The curse of sin made work hard. It didn't make work bad. Work was good. Sin made work that was good hard and heavy. But laboring and toiling is what we're doing. And it's good to get your hands dirty or get your mind working towards things. We're producing, we're planning. These are all good things. But these are the things that happen on those 6 days or 5 days that we're working. Let me break it down even more specifically. On the 6 days or 5 days that we're working, we're trying to get ahead. We're meeting deadlines. We're producing material. We're strategizing and analyzing. We're completing assigned tasks. And those are all good things, and we feel good about them. They pay your salary so you can eat. They're great. Let me bring it a little bit more maybe into the home. We're managing our finances, looking at the budget, the bank account. We're doing school assignments if you're in school. We're running around doing errands. We're finishing house projects. We're shopping for our kids. These are all good things. But these are things that are what we normally do those 6 days or 5 days. And here's what I want to make just a separation from so you can have it in your mind, what looks different from the other 6 days. The idea of work is not just restricted to a normal 9-to-5 job. It is any activity that utilizes the things around us for gain. This is so important. When I just discovered this, I was just thinking through why are those good things not supposed to creep into the Sabbath? Or what would it be considered work and what's considered not work? Because that was the question Israelites were asking. Can I lift this or not? Right, if you look at the Gospels, Jesus had a real big battle with the Israelites because they kept doing all these rules. So Jesus would heal a man on the Sabbath. And the Jews, the Pharisees, would get mad at him. Say, you're not following the Sabbath. And Jesus would say, you would go help a sheep if it fell into a hole, but you're not going to help this lost sheep and heal this person? What Jesus was doing was not saying Sabbath is bad. He was refining it. That's why Jesus says, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. In other words, you were not made to fit into the confinement of all of these rules. The Sabbath is a gift made for you to receive. So Jesus is not saying don't do this. He's saying I need you to think about what it is about. And work, I would say for us, is anything that utilizes the things around us for gain. What does that mean? Well, you utilize your computer for gain. You utilize people for employees for gain. You utilize your Slack app and your phone, and you utilize your car, and you utilize your resources and your energy. You use things to gain things, and that's not a bad thing. But that's what work is in this essence. And I want to show you an example of this from the Israelite story, Exodus 20. This is a command that ends up in the law, but this is a unique command about the Sabbath. This will show us what we're talking about when it decides what is work. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Now catch this. He doesn't just say you shouldn't do any work. He says neither should your son or daughter do work, or your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the foreigner who is within your gates. Now, why does God have to say not just you have to stop working, but everything else around you? And I would say even the land too. Later on, he says the land has to rest at some point. Why does God say everything around you needs to take time off? I would say the Sabbath extended to the servants and animals and even the land of the family, because to cease from work was an act of resistance to the type of exploitation that other nations were known for. You see, Egypt had control over Israel for over 400 years. And for 400 years, the Israelites had to work 7 days a week nonstop. They were exploited for their gain, for the gain of Egypt, to build their storehouses. They weren't cared for. They were used as tools, seen as means to a greater end. And so Sabbath comes in, and Sabbath becomes this resistance against this culture of exploiting and utilizing things just to get something. And I love that, because even back then, the female and male servants were not like what we imagine slavery to be. They were part of the household. They were treated a lot different. They were paid. But guess what? Even those people that had to do a lot of the work had to have a day off as well. God said everyone. Because if you're using your servant or your livestock, again, you're working and you're trying to do things to accomplish and achieve and produce. I love what Tilden Edwards says. He says, the principle involved in deciding what is work here is not so much the physical nature of an activity, but its purpose. Hopefully it's helpful for you to start thinking, what is work and what is not work? It's not so much the physical activity, it's the purpose of what you're doing. If its intent signifies human power over nature, if it shows human mastery of the world by the purposeful and constructive exercise of intelligence, you're using your mind and skill, then it is maluka, work, which violates the restful intent of Sabbath time to recognize our dependence on God as ultimate creator and sustainer. What Tilden is saying is the same thing I'm trying to say that you see in the Bible, that you are not supposed to bring in that kind of utilitarian, I'm going to functionally use these things to accomplish. You're not bringing that into the Sabbath. Is that wrong to have human power over nature? No, because God says we're supposed to steward and cultivate, and we're over nature and animals. But to bring that into the Sabbath means that we have this perpetuating process and cycle of having to produce, and that will never give your mind rest. And that's why many of us feel exhausted. It's because we're not doing our 9-to-5 job on Saturday or Sunday, but we're doing other things that is considered work in this idea of trying to perform and achieve, and so our minds are never at rest. And the idea of Sabbath is to stop all of the work. If work is a posture of using computers, people, resources, things, then Sabbath is a posture of enjoying. If work consists of control, you control certain things to get certain outcomes, then Sabbath consists of dependence. If you're wondering why Sabbath is important to modern day Christians right now who follow Jesus, is because as we work, we're usually in control of things, or someone's in control of us. But hardly are we ever saying, I'm going to receive and depend on God as we work. It's easy for us to start thinking, my work depends on my ability to do it right. And so you're subtly tricking yourself into thinking that you're the source of your income, you're the source of welfare, you're the source of your good life. And that is such a deceptive lie because you're not the source. Jesus is the source of your provision and your health and the good life. And yes, you work hard. But if we're always working, we're never going to be in a state of depending on God to be our ultimate provider. And so one of the reasons God says to stop this work is that you posture yourself in a physical way to say, God, you're the one giving me these things. Don't fool yourself, Movement Church. You are not in control of providing for all the stuff in your life. You have to work hard. But God's name, Jehovah Jireh, is the provider. Is the provider. And he uses your work, but he's over your provision. To put so much pressure on us and burden to get things right, have to pay all the bills and accomplish and climb the ladder that will crush us in a way that we were never supposed to carry those burdens. So why is this important to us then? Why do we need to figure out what is work and what isn't work? Okay, so and you could be asking, how do I figure this out for my life? Like, I don't want to be legalistic. I don't want to just make a huge list of things I can do or I can't do. So how do I figure out how this applies to me? How do I figure out why this is important? Chris, I can just turn my email off and not work. I just want to say this before I move on. I really want you to get this. That's why we're slowing down to take this piece by piece. Because I know that if you are expecting rest when you enter a day off or Sabbath or whatever, and you do it wrongly, you will end up subtly becoming bitter at God. The chances are becoming bitter at God because you're saying, God, I'm doing these things, but I'm not getting the results that you promised. And it's not God, it's not working, it's not faithful. It's that we're actually not living in the way that God created us to live. So I really want you to experience this. I talked to so many of you. Anxiety, fear, restlessness. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, I'm filled with anxiety. Like there's never really a moment where I'm not anxious about something. And I think that'd be true for many of us, maybe not every single day, but you guys know your physical body cannot go into work, but your mind can be giving you exhaustion, leading you into exhaustion, right? This is important because, and I say this to the team today, the world does not need to look at Christians and see Christians as exhausted, weary, restless, and anxious. That is not a good apologetic for the gospel. You know why? Because we're called to be an alternate city, the salt and light of the world. Are we called to be perfect? No. We all called to live differently. And so if we're living at the pace and the way that the world lives, then we're never going to stand out and be light. We're never going to be a city on the hill. We'll never be salt. And so one of the ways that we show the gospel is not just with our words, that is so important, but also with our lifestyles. And if you're hunkering down with the rat race of grinding and chasing the next thing, you're actually speaking loud with your life that you do not rest in the gospel to be sufficient for you. So this is more than just a day off. This is actually fundamental to what we believe about God. Said it this way for maybe the implication for you, why it's important. We don't often experience the rest we need because we don't really ever cease working. We just rename our activities as chores or projects or errands, but our minds and bodies and souls are not so easily fooled. So don't think the Israelites are dumb for making all these loopholes. We make loopholes. I used to be so hard on the Pharisees. Like, these fools, look at how religious they are. Look how legalistic they are. And I would be like, man, they're so bad in Bible college. Like, these are the enemy of Jesus. And then, I became a Pharisee. Some of you guys are Pharisees. Can I just say that? I don't know. I said it, so it's too late now. I can't take it back. That's fine. Jesus loves Pharisees. But being a Pharisee, I know, speaking from an ex-Pharisee that still has tendencies to become a Pharisee. What is a Pharisee? Someone who says they love God, but who makes everything based on how they perform and the rules and confinement and legalism and dotting every single I and T and not even thinking about who God is. They're figuring out, making sure they check every box. And not boxes God even asked you to check, extra boxes. They had layers to their layers of rules. If you look at the Bible, there's only like 4 things of like what not to do on the Sabbath. And they created hundreds of things that were extra biblical. Being a Pharisee, they created loopholes, and we just do the same thing and we shuffle it around. We rename our activity. So you might call Saturday a day of chores, a day of project, a day of errands. But while you need to get things done, and we're going to talk about the day of preparation next week and how the Israelites had a whole day or a day where they mentally actually prepared things before they did the Sabbath. If you didn't know that, that's so revolutionary. Because you're probably thinking, well, when am I supposed to do the chores and the errands and the stuff? That is important. I'm not saying don't do that. Don't feed your kids. Like, feed your kids. Do your errands. Like, plant the garden. But what I'm saying is you got to actually have a day of preparation. That's why the Bible says strive to enter into the rest. It takes work to rest in our culture, right? You can't just slip into rest. You got to be a monk, like on an island by yourself to slip into rest. In our day and age, you can't slip into rest. It takes work. Just like going on vacation before, you got to do a lot of work to get ready. The same thing. And so the Israelites would do a day of preparation to get all this stuff done so they actually could unplug and rest. So we'll look at that next week. But we don't want to be caught saying we rest, but we're just renaming activities. That is dangerous. Because, and let me say this very clearly, the renaming of our work is really just a symptom of our idolatry of productivity and our enslavement to activity. And I can say that from my own life, that if I'm just going to reshuffle the name of work and still do all these things, though they're good things, I'm not saying they're bad things, you might want to look a little bit deeper to say, why can't you let that thing go? Why can't you let that ball fall? Why can't you let that obligation go through? Why can't you say no to that person? Why can't you put your phone down? It might not be because you have to do the work. Sometimes, and I talk to people, they don't have to do the extra work. They just feel like they have to. And your feeling of you have to do the work might be, not always, it might be because you idolize productivity. And you idolize productivity because you're not believing and trusting in Jesus to be sufficient to carry your life. Or you are enslaved to activity. What does that mean? You always have to be doing something. This is why I got social media off my phone. I have no internet, no web browser. Why? Because I'm like, holy? No, because I'm dumb and I'm a sheep and I kept looking at it, so I need to stop looking at it because it's not healthy. Okay, so if you need to follow my instruction, I have a code. I cannot get onto the web browser, and it's so freeing. It is so freeing. When people ask me questions, sorry, I can't look that up. Oh, did you see what that person did? No, I actually don't care. I don't want to see. That's stressful. Or I talked to someone yesterday. I'm not going to name their names. It's awesome. Serena, sorry. This is a beautiful thing. I only call people who I wanted to show off. But Serena told me, and you could talk to her, that she took social media, the Instagram, Facebook off her phone, and she deleted her account because it just wasn't helpful. Right? Activity is good, but too much of any good thing is bad, right? Like, so you could die drinking too much water, but your body needs water. Okay, so am I saying don't go on Netflix, social media? No, but there's enslavement that we have that we just justify and change the word to. And we kind of like, we cuddle our idols. And we protect them and we justify them. And if you ever find yourself justifying why you have to keep Instagram, why you have to do this work, you probably have an idol that you're excusing yourself from. I have idols in my life that I know they're idols because I justify why I need to keep them around. And any kind of idol or enslavement will keep us from experiencing the true rest of Jesus. Idols don't care about your wealth, or your health, and your good being, and your welfare, and your joy, and your peace. Being enslaved to a taskmaster of activity and productivity in our culture, I just saw the Surgeon General released a paper, an 81-page paper, that said going on social media is harmful for your kids. I didn't need that. I knew that. I didn't need an 81-page paper to tell me this is harmful for our teenagers. Why did it take the Surgeon General to say that? Why did it take years of suicides and depression rates to plummet or skyrocket? Why did it take comparison and women and girls trying to be like other girls and men trying to be like other men that they didn't have to be? Why? Our activity is killing us and we're enslaved to it. And the Sabbath is a way to break the chains of the world. Do we have to keep the Sabbath? No. You figure out a better way to break the chains of the world and activity. If you figure it out, do it. But this is such a wise tool to help us break the chains of our addictions and the rat race that we find ourselves in. Number two, this is maybe not as important as it sounds like spiritually up in the top of like what is most important about Sabbath, but I think it's really helpful because the Sabbath is not just ceasing, we can talk about this later, it's actually delighting. Isaiah 58:13 says, I want you to call my Sabbath a delight. That's a command from God. God says, call my Sabbath a delight. Call it a joy. It's a delight, not a burden. And if we view everything as always useful to us, it will never be beautiful to us. If all we view around us as things that are just useful, just functional, just tools, then they will never be beautiful. And if we see things around us as tools or means to a greater end, we will never delight in them. Part of our relationship with God is not just using him. It's not using him. Not using the tools, though they're helpful for the world's sake of getting the resources that we have around us, animals and things. Part of why God created the world like it is so that we would see it as beautiful and then see him as beautiful because everything else is beautiful. Are you kidding me? We could have had a black and white world. We could have had cheese pizza and not pepperoni. We could have had no fruit. We could have had burnt coffee, but we have light roast. Come on, somebody. We have Chinese food and Thai food. We have flavors and spices and sounds and smells and music. Why? Those aren't functional. You want to know why? Because God is beautiful. Because God is beautiful. And he wants you to enjoy those things because they glorify him. If you point that shadow back to the substance of Jesus, everything reflects him. Everything's made for him. So if you're not enjoying creation, you're going to be hard fought to actually try to enjoy the God of creation. Because God's creation reflects his beauty. Mangoes aren't just nutrients, okay? They're beautiful, and they taste so good. Fight me. People aren't just employees. Sunsets aren't just science. The Bible isn't just wisdom. Sex isn't just reproduction. Why do I say that? Because you can start getting in a utilitarian kind of lifestyle where mangoes are just, I got to eat this to be healthy. I got to use people just to get my means. Sunsets are just what science does. The Bible is just for me to life hack my way into having a better life. And sex is for me to have a baby. And while those things are all true, mangoes are also for you to say, oh, this is so good. Not care about what kind of vitamins you get. Not care about what it's going to do for your body. Sunsets, yes, there's a scientific reason we're spinning around the sun, but just stare at it. Don't analyze it. Because if you're always thinking about why you can use something and analyze something, and that's work, we never get to sit and enjoy and delight. And this is what the Bible says, if you want a verse for it. Psalm 34 says, taste and see that the Lord is good. The Message version says, taste the mangoes and see. I'm joking. I don't know why mangoes have coming up. I don't even eat them that often. They just taste good. You can't fully treasure God if he is just a means to a better life, to less suffering, to more peace. God is worthy, not because of his usefulness, but because of his goodness. Let me read that one more time. You can't fully treasure God if he's just a means to a better life, to less suffering, or to more peace, or just to heaven. God is worthy, not because of his usefulness. That helps. He's worthy because he is good and he's holy. And is it awesome that God gives us peace and joy and he does things for us? Yes and amen, and that makes him even more special. But if he didn't do anything beyond the cross, even besides the cross, he was worthy. And then now we have the cross. He's worthy because he is good. And I wonder, do you see God as just useful? And do you see his creation as just useful? Just resources, raw resources to accomplish your desired end. Work is good, but it is not God. And I love that the God of creation built into the fabric of this world that we would stop and delight. And this is the proof that you cannot delight fully until you fully stop. Can you find joy in doing work? Yes, good work brings joy. Nothing wrong with that. But too much of it will crush your ability to have that joy. And so we need to stop back. I think someone once said, you will not be able to appreciate what you create until you step back from it and look at it from a distance. And so God did that. In 6 days he created, he stepped back and he said, this is good. And he appreciated what he created. And he modeled for us that we work hard and do our jobs with our kids and our spouses and our companies in this world, and we execute justice and right and do all these beautiful things. And then we step back because we're not the savior of the world. We step back and say, that's good. I can go to sleep and rest because God is not sleeping. But I can also enjoy the work I did. It's not finished, but I can enjoy the work I did. If you think about Sabbath being once every week, that adds up to what? I think once every week, 52 to almost 7 weeks of vacation or 7 weeks of like days off. And one Jewish scholar said, the reason why the Bible doesn't talk about vacations is because if people honor the Sabbath, there would be no need for vacations. Now, I'm not saying vacation is bad, but the reason why we need to jump out of doing everything and running away, and then that makes us feel exhausted, is because we're in this rat race of doing things and not honoring our bodies and creation and always using but not enjoying, and so we feel exhausted. But one day, I'm telling you, one day of honoring the Sabbath like we're created to do and worshiping God in it is better than 2 days of our normal days of days off, but running around doing errands and chores. So here's the main idea. If work is utilizing the things around us as tools in order to gain, then the Sabbath is enjoying the things around us as gifts in order to delight and worship. If work is using the things around us as tools in order to gain, and that needs to happen, that's good, in moderation, then Sabbath is enjoying the things around us as gifts in order to delight and worship. If you view the world as a whole bunch of tools so that you can use for your end, it's kind of hard to always look at something that you see as a tool and appreciate it as a gift. And so maybe the tool you were using the other 6 days, you put down, you step back, and now you can appreciate it as a gift because you're not in it. Sometimes you have to get out of the thing you're in to appreciate it. Parents, you have to be away from your kids to appreciate your kids. That's not a bad thing. Hey, you laugh because you don't have kids. When people aren't laughing when they have kids, they know. I love my kids. And I love them to death. And I tell them I love them like 20 times a day. I love them. But then when I come back from a couple of days, I'm missing them and I appreciate them. And so everything with each other, spouse, work, everything. You step back, you appreciate it even more because sometimes we're so close. We're in it too much. And God wants us to live a life of worship. And worship is adoration and enjoyment and delight. So Sabbath is not a means to you just getting the rest you need so you can work harder. It's also a means of being able to worship God and enjoying the life he's given you. Isn't that sad if we walked around being so burdened, so restless, never enjoying God? I'm sorry, but I'm not waiting till heaven to start enjoying God. The Bible tells us to pray that heaven comes to earth. There is partial joy here, not full joy, but there's a lot of reasons to still be joyful in this world. And I want to start enjoying them now because one day it will get even greater. Let me ask you just some questions that will maybe help you prep your mind as you begin to think through this in our formation moment. Maybe 3 questions that you can just think through, and I'll put this on the Slack later. Number 1, what activities do you need to cease doing? Like on your day off, on the Sabbath, not your 9-to-5 job, what other activities that you have justified, you have renamed, shuffled around, made loopholes around, that you need to stop doing? That one day you're not going to do work, you need to stop doing that activity because you're treating it as something of I got to use this to gain something, and it's not causing you to rest. Number 2, what kind of work are you renaming? What kind of things are you justifying in the idea of work? You're renaming it as like, oh, this is like a project. Maybe on Sabbath you garden. That's great. Maybe it's not considered work because you just love doing that. But if it's not delightful and you're doing it because you have to for a party that's coming and you got to do all this stuff and there's pressure, that is not good. Again, it's not just the activity, it's the purpose behind what you're doing that will either bring you rest or toil and exhaustion? And lastly, what are you using that you need to enjoy? What are you using? That's a good gift, or a good tool from God that you need to put down so you can back away and enjoy. Maybe ask a different way. What in your life have you stopped enjoying? You know you should enjoy this, and that thing doesn't bring you joy. I would venture to say the reason why it doesn't bring you joy is because you're exhausted and you're probably overly using it. And every gift is great in moderation, especially when we look up to God and say, you are the one that fulfills me. So here's a question I want you just to process through. I kept it open-ended because I think there's a lot of applications for how we live our lives, and I think the Holy Spirit can already, hopefully, is speaking to you on what you do on your days off and how you handle those things and things you don't need to be doing. But how does this change the way you see and approach your days off or Sabbath? Call it whatever you want. How does it approach the time off from work, outside of your job? How does this change the way you see and approach it? It should change the way we see it. This is changing the way I even view Sabbath. It's not just stopping, it's also delighting, and there's things to do, and there's preparations to make, but I want to do so I can enter in with joy and worship and delight and not burden. I want you to enter into that as well. So let's turn to our neighbors. 7 minutes on the clock. How does this change the way you see and approach your day off and Sabbath? And then after you share that, you can unpack that a little bit. Would you just lay a hand on your neighbor and pray for them that they would be able to enter into rest and delight? And then we'll come back and worship Jesus together.